All right, welcome to day 5 of Unit 2. Today we are going to wrap up the unit. So your unit test will be next class. You also will be able to complete all of your study guide before next class as well. Today we're going to talk about Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and the Catholic Reformation, which is sometimes called the Counter-Reformation. So we'll just go ahead and jump right on into it. All right, so we've seen the Lutheranism and Calvinism come around, but how does this actually shape Europe? For the first time, we are seeing a nation-state denying the Pope's authority in England. So let's find out how and why the Catholic Church's and what the Catholic Church's response actually was. So this guy right here, this is Henry VIII. You may know a little bit about him. He is the King of England. Okay, he was the King of England at the time during the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII, he gets all tangled up with the Catholic Church. So when Martin Luther wrote his 95 Theses and had all of his issues with the Catholic Church, Henry VIII defended the Catholic Church. So how is it that he eventually ends up splitting with the church? Well, Henry VIII had many wives. He had several marriages throughout his lifetime, 6 to be exact. And so at this point, he's currently married to Catherine of Aragon, who is the daughter of the King of Spain, which is a Catholic nation. Queens are expected to give kings male heirs to the throne at this point in time, and although Catherine had been pregnant several times, only one baby had actually survived infancy, and the baby was a girl. It was Mary. So after being married to Catherine for 16 years, Henry VIII decides that it's obvious she's not going to produce a male heir for him, so he decides to divorce her. Well, the Catholic Church strongly disapproved of the divorce, and Pope Clement VII actually refused. He said, there's no way that you're going to get this divorce. So Henry VIII ends up, he decides that he's going to split with the Catholic Church, and he decides that he's going to start his own church. Okay, and this is going to happen in 1533. And when he splits, he calls the Church of England. Very original name. It's also known as the Anglican Church as well. So because it is not a Catholic church, it has split from Rome and from the Catholic Church. It is a Protestant church. And of course, Henry VIII is going to make himself the head of the church. Okay, so he says that he is in control and that he's running the show. So now that he's the head of the church, he's able to go ahead and grant himself a divorce. And he goes on to marry Anne Boleyn, who eventually gives him a son named Edward. Well, when Henry VIII died, the throne passes on to Edward, who eventually becomes ill and he dies as well. So after that, the throne of England is going to go to Mary, Henry's first daughter, who's later nicknamed Bloody Mary, since her reign is remembered for a lot of religious violence. When Mary dies, she has had no children, so the crown passes on to Elizabeth I. Here you can see her. So this begins the golden era for England. Elizabeth makes the Protestant church the main church of England. She was very tolerant of religious dissenters and secured religious settlement that was Anglican, with the monarch in control of it instead of how things had been in the past. So it had been a hybrid or a mix of Catholic ritual and Protestant theology. But this is the first time that we see where the monarch, in this case Elizabeth I of the nation, has political power and not the Pope. So not everyone was happy with Elizabeth ruling England, especially the Catholics. They viewed her as an illegitimate child of Henry VIII, since he had divorced and the Catholic Church did not recognize the divorce. So there was a push for Mary, Queen of Scots, who was actually Elizabeth's cousin, to take over the throne. Well, Elizabeth found out about this plot and had Mary executed. She executed her own, she had her beheaded her own cousin. So Elizabeth promoted expanding the English Empire by funding various exploration expeditions, as well as a few piracy campaigns of the Spanish fleets that were returning from the New World with a lot of gold and silver on them. Of course, this is going to provoke Spain, and in 1588, Philip II, who is he had been married to Mary, who was the Queen of Scots, he sends the Spanish Armada to attack. Thanks to a terrible storm that had come up in the English Channel, Elizabeth and her navy were actually able to defeat the Spanish Armada. All right, so what are the effects of this Reformation that has gone on in England? Due to the changes in religious views, the Reformation is going to bring about changes in England, of course. So first we see where Henry VIII, he breaks with the Catholic Church and divorces his wife. Then, due to an act of supremacy, he declares himself to be the head of the church, the self-appointed leader of the Church of England. So now that he has become the leader of the church, all of the Catholic Church property becomes seized by the British government, and it's given to the Church of England. And finally, the Anglican Church is going to become the national church of England. It becomes the official Church of England. All right, so let's look at the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Reformation. Oh my goodness, hang on a second. Let me get us back to where we were. Having technical difficulties today, guys. Sorry. All right, so we looked at the effects. Let's get through these. One more. Here we go. Okay. All right, so on to the Catholic Reformation, which is also known as the Counter-Reformation. Catholic Church has had a number of attacks against it, if you will. So the Catholic Church is going to undergo a reformation of its own. Sometimes you also hear this period referred to as the Counter-Reformation. So why? Why did they feel the need to have a Counter-Reformation? It had two main reasons why they needed to reform. First of all, there was a need to get back to the spiritual matters of the church. So there had been so much corruption that the leaders felt it was time to get back to the business of legitimate salvation. The other major reason for the Catholic Reformation was to try to stop the spread of Protestantism. This was an effort to get people who had left the Catholic Church to come back. The best way to think about the Counter-Reformation is as an internal reassessment of the Catholic Church. So they stop and they take a look at everything that's going on within the church, and they try to come up with how they can make it better and have people return to the Catholic Church. So what actually happens? There's going to be a few things. Pope Paul III, he brought the Spanish Inquisition to Rome. Heretics were put on trial, and while this was not meant to punish Protestants, it is seen as a sort of a scare tactic to keep more Catholics from converting to Protestantism. Later, Pope Paul IV, he published a list of books that were forbidden because it would damage a Catholic's faith. Okay, it could ruin their morals. They read these books. I'm not sure what's going on with our slides here, but okay. All right, so he published this list of books that are forbidden because it would damage a Catholic's faith and morals. So can you guess of any books that might possibly, or any writings that could possibly be on this list? If you immediately said Martin Luther's 95 Theses, you would be absolutely right. Or any of the writings of John Calvin or anybody else that was a religious dissenter at this point in time. Another occurrence is the Council of Trent. This is called together in 1543. They had 3 meetings over the course of 16 years, and it was mostly made up of bishops from Italy and Spain. So as a result, we see that our bishops are giving more control, and parishes become more important as well. So in their 3 meetings, they determined that there needed to be an end to the sale of indulgences. They tightened the discipline of the clergy, so they kind of reeled in those guys that were out there kind of doing their own thing, not necessarily following the way that the Catholic Church wanted things to be done. And we also see that they place more importance of the ceremony and rituals in Catholicism again. So for instance, weekly attendance at Mass became obligatory. Baptisms and marriages were more strictly regulated as well. Another effect here is that we see the formation of the Society of Jesus, whose members were called Jesuits. And it begins in 1534 by Ignatius Loyola. Interesting fact here, Loyola was actually a Spaniard. He had attended the same college in Paris as John Calvin, but it's never documented as to whether or not they met. The goal of the Society of Jesus was to spread Catholicism, which would then slow the spreading of Protestantism. Loyola thought of the Jesuits as kind of like a militia of the church. I mean, they weren't very violent, but they did think of them as as being the ones who would keep things on the straight and narrow, if you will. So they end up completely reforming Catholic education, and they began several universities all over Europe. So what are our effects? We've seen where there's we've had a Protestant Reformation, we've had a Catholic Reformation. So what differences did they make? Well, the Catholic Church becomes permanently weakened. We no longer see religious unity in Europe. Where it was once predominantly Catholic, we now see a split where most of Northern Europe is Protestant and Southern Europe is Catholic. It is because of this that religious matters are now going to become a part of not only foreign affairs, but also domestic affairs as well. So other changes that we see, or outgrowths that we see from this, here's where the Reformation leads us. We see that there is an encouragement of individual growth, which led to the growth of capitalism. There's a growth in literacy as the Bible is translated into vernacular and not just in Latin anymore. You know, the printing press is super important already now, and it's because books and writings can be reprinted and distributed so much faster than before. As I mentioned before, the Bible is now being printed in vernacular. Well, because of this, people are going to want to have more of an interest in learning how to read. So since they no longer have to depend on the church or priests to translate and interpret the Bible for them, they want to know how to read. So we see where they're going to start to want to go to school. They want to have more of an education so they can read the Bible for themselves in their own language. There's a growth away from religious things and a growth towards the secular, which you should remember means worldly or of the world, not religious. And while we see a growth in religious tolerance, meaning that people are free to practice as they wish, we also are going to see a growth of religious persecution. So I know that those two things seem a little backwards from each other, but that's what we're going to see. All right, so make sure that you have completed your study guide. If you have questions, you need to message me or you need to email me. I would say right now don't message me on Google Chrome because we're having some issues with that. So if you would please either text me through Remind or email me directly, that's fine with your questions. I'll answer any questions you have on your study guide. Now, I'm not going to do the whole thing for you, but I will help you with it, okay? Make sure you have that complete. You also need to make sure when you come to next class, you have all of your summaries written. I'm going to be collecting those and grading those as well as a homework grade. Another thing you need to make sure you have done before test day, your interactive notebook needs to be in order. So if you have been slacking and you haven't gotten that in order, you need to make sure you take care of that in the very near future as well. If you need to come in and see me, I will write you a pass and you're welcome to come in and take care of that anytime. Okay? Any questions? Get in touch with me. You know how to do it. See you soon. Bye.